Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session 1.2 of WIRE 2020. This session will be devoted to the subject of the skill supply for remote but resilient innovation ecosystem. We all know that skill matching becomes a more relevant aspect of the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. And this session will be devoted to discuss on the concept of resilience, on the concept of skills, competencies, and a lot of practical examples will be as well delivered by our panelists. Let me introduce myself. This session will be moderated by me. I am Marta Marin. I am the delegate of the Basque Country, the region in the north of Spain, based in Brussels, in the delegation to the European Union. My region is very active in the field of lifelong learning, vocational education and training, and I guess that that's the reason why I am the moderator today, which is a real pleasure for me. Let me as well introduce someone who you are not seeing on the screen right now. Is Doris Podruk. She is our rapporteur, so she has the responsibility to pick up the main messages and outcomes of our session, to deliver it for the final conclusions of the WIRE conference. Let's start the meeting. Today we will listen to 4 panelists. I will introduce the first panelist. The first panelist is Maria Roglic. Maria Roglic is working as a doctoral researcher at the Montpellier Management Institute. She focuses on sustainable rural development through social innovation in the context of the common agriculture policy instruments. But not only, furthermore, she's as well a practitioner. She has years of experience in organization building and multi-stakeholder policy implementation from an executive standpoint, and as well as mainstreaming participation in multi-stakeholder settings. So, Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, so to start this conversation on skill supply in innovation ecosystems, I would like to open with a hypothesis. So the whole idea of skill supply and innovation ecosystems is so we could live better. And in order to live better, we all need to work together, especially when we talk about remote regions and when we talk about resilience, because usually these are less developed regions. They are scarcely inhabited regions. So before we continue, I would like to share a thought. So there are 3 resources that are crucial when we talk about development, and they are all focused around engaging all these resources and actors that have these resources in order for them to work together. We talk about social capital, natural capital, and cultural capital. Social capital actually being manifested in the actors that we find within these territories, within these resilient remote regions we talk about. Natural capital corresponding to the territory itself, to the agrobiodiversity existing within this territory. And lastly, but not least important, is the cultural capital. It's the cultural capital coming from the lived experience of this territory, the experience that is manifested through traditions, through folklore. But yet, often we talk about notions, development, I talk about participation, innovation, resilience. But what do all these notions mean? So I would like to invite you to share with me your thoughts, your visions on what is actually participation. So please connect to WooClap on the link that you can see here, wooclap.com, Wire 2020. It is on the screen. And I would like to ask you, what are the associations you have when we talk about development? So please, just in your web browser, go to the web page, and this is an invitation both to the panelists and to the participants. Do connect, and let's have a virtual conversation on what development is, what resilience is, what innovation is, and what ecosystems are. Because these notions we use so often that we tend to forget that they sometimes have different meanings to different actors. And that the fact that they have different meanings to different actors actually is the key challenge we face when we talk about development, when we talk about fostering skill supply. So could you cite up to 10 words you associate with development? What are the words that come to mind when we talk about development? And here I invite all the participants to type in. Okay, so development is social progress. It's the social capital we talk about. Any other ideas? Life, the lived experience of the territory. Sustainability is something we talk about enormously. Quality of life, being, if we live together, we are to work together. If we are to be sustainable, we all together within one territory need to sustainably use the resources we have in hand. And then again, cooperation. And now let's move on to another notion. When we talk about resilience, what is resilience for you? What does it mean to be resilient in the context of development, in the context of developing the remote and far out regions? What is the first idea that comes to mind when we talk about resilience? So the idea is to connect on the, okay, good. Shock, event, bounds crisis proof. Okay, I don't think that crisis proof. Okay, adaptability. So in order to be adaptable, that means we need to adapt not only to the territory, but we also need to adapt to the actors. But let's move forward. So, okay, we need to be adaptable. We need to be crisis proof. And all this requires of us to be innovative. So in order to be resilient, we need to be innovative. So what does it mean to be innovative? What are the words you associate with innovation in remote regions? What is this change that we talk about? It is the change that comes from actors. It is the change that comes from the territory. It is the change that comes from the improvement when we all work together. Does it come through institutions, or does it come through collaborative processes that are happening in the field unrelated to the governance system that we work with? So what is innovation? Entrepreneurship. When we talk about entrepreneurship and innovation, we can see a lot of programs in Europe, such as the LEADER program, that is fostering new indigenous development, enhancing and engaging local access to work together. And they're supposed to work together in these remote regions, in the rural, abandoned regions. The definition of what a remote region is, I find personally, as a management scholar, differs when you look at it from a perspective of a geographer, of an economist, of an anthropologist. So I ask you yet another question. What is a remote region? How do you understand the notion of a remote region? What are the words you associate with remote regions? So it is again the connections, the participation and the collaboration that we see between the markets, between the rural areas that produce and the metropolis, the urban areas that are the hubs where actually it is a region that is distant, that is not connected. It is a region where all the actors need to draw and work together to channel connectivity. It is something that the LEADER program, the European Union LEADER program, has detected since 1989, and it's something that it has pushed the actors to work on. In order to build an ecosystem of local actors that exist in abandoned remote regions where they all work together to connect resources, to push together, to work together, to deliver development. So again, I ask you, what is ecosystem? What does it mean? What are the words that we associate with an ecosystem? It is the mutual interdependence of actors. Here, yet again, when we engage in a notion that is so close to regional economics, we see that the key word is participation. It's participation and cooperation, either between the actors, between the territory, or between the resources. It is our understanding on how we work together. So, as an organization studies scholar, I actually focus on the management aspect of these notions, on the notions of resilience, innovation, remote region, and ecosystem. It is the participation that is at the heart of all of these movements, at the heart of all of these unfoldings. So the multi-stakeholder initiatives I would like to talk about are usually defined as private governance mechanisms that involve cooperation, civil society organization, and other actors, such as governments, academia, or unions, that are you're supposed to cope with social and environmental challenges. But what is the success on the micro scale of an ecosystem? So what makes an ecosystem resilient? What makes a remote region development? What are the micro actions that unfold, that happen on the scale of a territory, on the scale of the organization? That is at the heart of my research question, and that is at the heart of the presentation I would like to deliver for you today.
5 minutes left.
When we talk about participation as a key, I know. So when we talk about participation, at the heart of all these processes, at the heart of the ecosystems, I look at it through double lens. The lens of participation as being procedural and participation as being substantial. Procedural participation is the participation we know through the forms and practices and norms that are imposed through different programs, such as the European Rural Development Program, Fisheries Program, that push for creation of local action groups as multi-stakeholder initiatives, where they push actors to work together to ensure that they will all work together and cooperate well together. Since 1989 until 2020, until today, what was at the beginning a simple initiative founded by the European Union with very few guidelines and very few restrictions has today become a full-scale program that has been mainstreamed to all European funds. And it's a program that is today vastly critiqued. It is a program that is said to be innovative, that is said to be participative, that is supposed to be a response to problems of remote regions. Yet, we see that although there is a significant element of the procedural participation within this program, the substantial participation, the fact of that people coming together, people working together, only exist in the nascent organizational aspects of this program, of these local action groups, of these organizations. So, drawing from my experience as a director of a local action group, and to conclude my presentation, which was more opening the floor to Alberto than anything else, who will give us a micro perspective on these initiatives, is that when we talk about development and when we talk about remote regions, one of the things that we tend to forget is that the crucial is to first and foremost engage all the actors and all the resources existing in this territory, and to find tools and ways for all these actors to work together. In the case of a local action group, LAG5, this specifically meant engaging with all the actors in the territory and not framing them, not shaping them, but listening to them. It is in the process of listening to them that they envisioned projects that had actually enhanced the development of the territory and had actually allowed for the creation of 45 new jobs within the period of only 5 years. And to finish my presentation, I would like to invite you to look into one of the empirical results of this substantial participation, which is the project that LAG5 as a multi-stakeholder initiative in South Croatia is currently doing. It is the Rural 3.0 service learning for the rural development project. It is a project that has been drafted by the actors in the territory and the professionals, all working together to find a way on how to deliver new skills to the territory, on trying to answer to the question, how do we make our territory more attractive to students? How do we attract young people to come in our territory, to work with us and to envision development with us? And with this very broad and very wide presentation, I would like to set the floor for Alberto.
Thank you, Maria. You make my job very easy because you've been really respecting sharp 15 minutes presentation. Thank you as well because I think that you really put the focus on the importance of the soft skills, as well as you really explained the advantages of a program such as LEADER, which is quite a long-lasting experience from the Common Agriculture Policy, which is really very, very valuable. And as you mentioned, we will now, I will give the floor, but before I give the floor to Alberto, let me introduce himself. Alberto Giacometti is a research fellow at North Regio, an Stockholm-based research center for regional development and planning, established by the Nordic Council of Ministers. Alberto has been active in the Nordic thematic group for innovative and resilient regions, which has explored different ways regions across the Nordic countries are working with the concept of resilience, digitalization, smart specialization, and skills development. Alberto, it's your turn now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for the introduction, and thank you, Maria, for setting the scene. let me add that something unique about this Nordic thematic group on innovative and resilient regions is that the work that we do together is done both researchers at Norregio together with practitioners, and we have members from national level in different ministries, regional level, and cross-border committees. So together we make the research on these various topics quite closely connected to the policy discussions and to the different regional realities across the countries. I'd like to, of course, build up on this idea that, well, for resilient regions, we need skills, we need availability of skills, and let me elaborate. Maria has already set a little bit the scene. What do we mean by resilience and skills? But let me come back to this concept since they can mean so many things. And resilience, and specifically regional resilience, both from an economic, social perspectives, determines how capable communities are to cope with change. Some of you mentioned shocks, so that can be crises like the COVID-19, but it can also be gradual stress, like a brain drain. And resilience is not binary. It's not that a region is or is not resilient. Is more degrees of resilience, and that depends on the type of the disturbance, on its intensity, its timing, and also the context. So the shock will affect one region differently to another, and these regions will also recover in a different way. So what are those factors that help them recover? Therefore, focusing on the means makes more sense than focusing on the end result, meaning that this continuous effort of adaptation is what makes regions more or less resilient. And that, of course, needs to be strengthened through different policies and regional actions. Now, coming to the second point, skills. What is skills? One of the key findings in Nordic case studies when we analyze different shocks and different crises was that skills and skilled labor is an essential factor in driving this recovery process and setting up a more sustainable development path into the future. So of course we are interested to know, well, what are these skills? And again, it's one of those terms that we all know what they are, but we don't have a universal definition. Yet you could say that the literature converges that skills have some kind of instrumental value. So as opposed to plain knowledge, skills serve a specific function. And so if we assume that that instrumental purpose of skills, we could also say that its value, the value of skills, depends on the demand. Now, every individual, every one of us has a unique skill set, and that is acquired through a combination of formal education, culture, experience, and all kinds of other formal, informal forms of learning. And now, why is this so important? Why is our skills so important? They are important at various levels. So from the individual level, it's also important for a social and economic level. So we want thriving individuals, but also societies and economies. And so securing the availability of skills in a region is the main insurance for the social and economic resilience of any region. As we said this morning as well, it is also important to boost innovation. Now, the challenge is that both the supply and the demand of skills is fluid, is in a constant flux. This morning, we spoke a lot about industrial innovation or renewal with automation and digitalization. So what does that mean for our skill pool? How fast is our skills becoming outdated? And how fast can our education programs adapt to that change? But also the supply and demand can be shifted through policy. We have the Agenda 2030, and these goals of the green transition are extremely ambitious. These represent a major change or transformation of our economies, and that means also the skills we need to affront that. Then we have demographic trends, the normal process of people growing older, retiring, and younger people entering the labor market. And of course, there's a shift of skills in that process. But other demographic trends, such as migration, urbanization, often to the detriment of rural areas, where more people are moving to more competitive regions, you could say, to cities, and also typical for remote regions, which is aging population or low birth rates. Therefore, when we speak about skills availability in a region, we are only partly talking about education. But often we put a lot of focus on education. To exemplify this, in the very north of Sweden and Finland, we have the regions of Norrbotten and Lapland. Those regions are estimated to decline in population by 8 percentage points in the next 20 years. 8% drop in the population. Yet, at the same time, this is not necessarily because of a lack of job opportunities. In fact, there is an enormous demand for jobs. If you look at Norrbotten alone, we expect that 42% of welfare sector workers will retire within 10 years, 50% of teachers, and even in private sector, you could say 39% of manufacturing and mining. So it's a huge challenge, and it's not exactly about whether there are skills or not. It's about the supply. So there is a shift today in the discourse on skills, in how to understand skills in ecosystems, as Maria was bringing this idea earlier today. We understand ecosystems, and this represents a move from looking at supply alone and also the formal roles of education and training, to consider more dynamic complexity of factors, policy areas, and especially the role of different actors, in skills development and governance. So having this in mind, this means that skills development is the result of this continuous interplay between networks, firms, markets, institutions, and how much, and also a focus on the role on companies, employers, networks, and in the individual in driving that skills acquisition. So in the Nordic countries, we've been looking at this skills ecosystem in three policy areas, you could say: education, labor market, and regional development, and try to understand, okay, which are the actors that are inside these different policy areas that determine skills governance. So, of course, if you look at education, you have typically the Ministry of Education, maybe sometimes some government agency, and then, of course, there's the different education institutions: higher education, upper secondary education, primary education, and vocational education. But if you look at the different countries, this looks differently. The mandate can be at the various levels: national, regional, municipal, or a combination of these. Which actors play a role? It can vary a lot. Then, when we look at the policy area of labor, around the labor markets, we have typically the Ministry of Labor. We have employer organizations, trade unions. At the regional level, we have often regional employment offices. And at local level, we have also public employment services. And these, again, it can vary where they are allocated, if locally, nationally, and so on. And finally, when it comes to regional development, we have yet another ministry, typically Ministry of Finance or Trade or Industry or something equivalent. And then the various business associations, clusters, chambers of commerce, business promotion agencies, also at various levels. So in practical terms, we see various forms of collaboration in Nordic regions. Where municipalities or regional authorities work work more or less closely with different actors, business organizations, universities, education, even, for instance, tourist offices in attracting new skills. And these constellations vary very significantly. These can be also because of the formal mandate. So if a region has the mandate or not to work with business development or education. But regardless of whether there is the formal role or not, we see that the pattern repeats itself. These actors in these three spheres always play a role in skills development and governance. And also we see that depending also what the challenges, the unique challenges of regions is how they work on these issues. Some regions have different challenges than others. If it's, for instance, brain drain, or is it the need for more vocational education? So depending on the issues at play, we see that there is different constellations on how different actors work. Yes, I'm about to finish. Thanks for the notice. We see that an exceptional case, to give an example, Norway is the only country that has a national strategy on skills development, talking specifically about these different spheres where skills governance play a role. And this strategy has been created precisely in this participatory way, where different actors across the landscape have contributed to the development of this strategy, from different government agencies to the SAMI, the indigenous group parliament, confederation and federations of labor market actors, and so on. And this focuses on the various relevant issues we discussed earlier: lifelong learning, overcoming the mismatch between the supply and the demand, and also in increasing individuals' freedom on what their choices are. We see that this is a step in the right direction, and then this has been replicated also at regional levels. There's a few regions in Norway that have also developed their own regional strategy on skills. But this is very exceptional, as I mentioned. We haven't seen anything like that in other countries. But I can tell a different, more bottom-up approach in the Norrbotten region in North Sweden, where they have created what they call the Norrbotten's Competence Council, which is an informal collaboration, is a task force to coordinate actions on skills development and governance. And here we have different actors participating: is municipalities, is employment service, is the regional council, the county board, the Luleå University of Technology, and the various vocational education skills. And they work on various tasks depending on their expertise. For instance, the university plays an important role in skills anticipation and prognosis. And then, of course, they work in various other issues such as adult and vocational education throughout the territory, validation and recognition of previous learning, very important if they need to integrate immigrants as well, and the development of distant learning centers. So I would like to end with those examples. Of course, we can think of a lot of other more micro-level initiatives where different actors collaborate in linking the supply and the demand, because it's often the case that companies need labor and job seekers need jobs, but they don't find each other for various reasons. So we can think from very micro level to a bit more macro level. But I'll stop there with my final message that, of course, skills are essential for securing resilient regions, but skills strategies and actions need to be embedded within the regional realities and in coordination with the regional actors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto. I think that, your contribution after the contribution of Maria is really a good example of, you mentioned this idea of constellation, and you mentioned this idea of these patterns that are very well settled in the culture, administrative culture, policy definition culture, and as well, I mean, bearing in mind that, in the Nordic regions, yeah, you face problems related to aging population, a lot of circumstances that really plays a role. So I think that it has been a real concrete example on how to deal with this complexity in a way that really have an impact, because you need this mapping of the territory in order to look for the right solution for your region or your municipality. Let's move on. I would like to recall the audience that there are Slido questions going on. I think that maybe the managers could link and could at a certain point show us how is going the participation of the audience. But let me now introduce our next speaker, Godfrey Baldaquino. He's professor of sociology at the University of Malta, founding editor of Island Studies Journal, and president of the International Small Islands Studies Association. Godfrey, I think that you have to say a lot about remote and resilience ecosystems. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. I will not say a lot because otherwise you will get angry with me and I will exceed my time. So thank you to the organizers of this event. It's a pleasure to be here virtually, having listened to Maria and Alberto before me as well. Of course, I think we would all have enjoyed a visit to Split and Croatia. It's a country I still have to visit. But unfortunately, a little virus has destroyed those plans, amongst many other plans that we have had and we may have in the future. But perhaps this is also an opportunity for us to reflect on a different way to approach this topic. We are living at a time when here we are, I'm working from my bedroom actually today, where we are able to do a lot of things without necessarily leaving our houses. And we are able to do that because we have transitioned, many of us, not all of us, of course, but we have transitioned to being able to work virtually, to working online, to exploit the advantages of the internet and information technology in order to, well, live a life as normal as possible. But this is a new normal. You all know that. And I think that we need to integrate this new normal perspective, even the way we approach the study of the challenges of skills in remote regions. I am saying this because, of course, today working from home might mean, if, of course, I have the necessary infrastructure, that I am able to continue working in a place that I like living in, which may be remote in a physical sense, in a geographical sense. But if it is connected, I can still continue my work and operate as if I were in a city, in a town, in a metropolitan area, without the hassle, without the problems of commuting, of air pollution, of lack of security, lack of safety, and so on. So we are perhaps in a position where we can have the best of both worlds, thanks to the virtues of new technology. This is going to be my spin for the next 10 minutes. I wonder if Marta can share a slide. Can you do that for me? Because it captures very neatly why I think people are being drawn increasingly to remote regions, including islands. The virtues of isolation have become quite self-evident in these days. People are trying to escape places that are relatively more dangerous because of the state of the pandemic. And certainly remote rural regions where there are sparse populations have become actually an attraction to a number of people. There are also those who are, we call them urban refugees or lifestyle refugees, individuals who have made enough money have no longer any interest in spending 2 hours on the motorway to get to work and from work, and may have young kids, and they are interested in bringing them up, raising them in an environment that is less stressful, more peaceful, with a sense of community. I mean, this is a word that I haven't heard yet this morning. A sense of community. Where has that gone? It seems that we are resigned to a situation where we live as atoms, suspecting our neighbors, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. We seem to have forgotten the joys of living in places where people know each other and take care of each other. The Airbnb phenomenon as well in tourism, I think, has also... Oops, who was that? As I was saying, tourism and the Airbnb revolution has also brought about a democratization of tourism accommodation, whereby individuals are more able to travel and spend time as tourists in remote rural regions, which may not have any hotels, which may not have any restaurants. And this is, of course, part of the appeal towards a more authentic tourism experience. Safety and community, I've already referred to these. The issue of connectivity is very important, of course. Broadband, I think, is critical in this day and age if we want to make this leap into a digitally inspired and enabled work environment. Having local businesses, of course, helps because it attracts talent, it attracts people looking for work, but it doesn't have to be like that anymore. I think we need to make this leap in the way that we look at this paradigm. Finally, local educational institutions, especially research centers or specialized units, can also attract young people to come and study. But of course, this is a very rare thing indeed to find in remote regions. Finally, the issue of place branding. Branding has become a very sophisticated art and science these days. You don't just brand products, but you can also brand places. So I would very much encourage people to think about the many different ways that small places, especially islands, because of course they are self-contained, they're self-evident, can brand themselves in such a way that they appeal to lifestyle refugees, people looking for a decent place to live in, and preferably to work in as well. Now, in order to come up with an idea of how these principles actually work in practice or not, I mean, it's fine theorizing about them, but do they actually work? I think we have a very interesting way of perhaps identifying if the practice matches the theory. And this is census statistics, census data. Many regions, especially islands, are self-contained census regions, which means that whenever a census has been carried out, it's quite possible, one is quite capable of identifying the number of people who lived in those regions over the years. And therefore, trends can be discerned. I've done a little exercise in relation to the islands of Ireland, but of course, this is an exercise that can be done in relation to many other islands around the world. We are talking about a conference taking place virtually in Croatia. Croatia is a country of many islands as well. A lot of data would be known about these islands, including demographic data, residences, preferably full-time residences, of course, people who would be enumerated during a census exercise. Now, when we look at the islands of Ireland, I think these are quite symptomatic of what's been happening to remote rural regions and islands across Europe. So across the 19th and the 20th century, we see a huge wave of depopulation. People are leaving. People are leaving, they're not coming back. People are going to the cities, they're looking for work, they're looking for decent quality of life, urbanization, globalization. You know, the remote region is associated with a backwater. It's traditional, it's conservative, it's a dead end for people looking for job, for adventure, for enterprise. So industrialization, etc., has decimated the populations of many remote regions. And this is evident in the statistics. The census data from Ireland. Ireland has been taking censuses since 1841, practically every 10 years. Down to approximately 1991, we have a steady, regular decline in population. Not only that, but those islands that are without a bridge to the mainland have an even stronger population decline. Those that have a bridge to the mainland or a tunnel to the mainland seem to have maintained some population, a higher level of population. But of course, they have lost population as well. When we look at the last 20, 30 years, something seems to be happening. And this, I think, is very interesting. Perhaps it's happening also in your own countries. in Italy, Carlo, perhaps in Croatia, Maria, Marta, perhaps in Spain as well. We see a stabilization of populations in islands, and indeed, in some cases, an increase of populations, even in islands that are not connected by bridges. So places like the Aran Islands, for example, of Ireland, Inishman, Inisheer, Inishbofin. These are relatively far away from the mainland. You need a ferry to go to them, sometimes in fairly rough water. I don't think they have an airport, in fact. So it's a three fairly remote island communities, and yet they seem to have found a winning strategy, a winning recipe for attracting people. Of course, people who know what they are going in for. This is not an easy life by any stretch of the imagination. However, it is a life that does appeal to a few people. And when we're dealing with small regions, of course, a few people is all you need. A small amount of people can make a big difference. So I will conclude by reminding ourselves that not everyone wants to live and work in Silicon Valley. People have choices. Talent doesn't necessarily have to migrate physically in places where it is needed. It can migrate virtually and maintain a connection to that via information technology. The periphery has its attractions. We must not forget that. And isolation can also be positively perceived. There are actually virtues in isolation, and therefore there are opportunities waiting to be had. Finally, an appeal. This is a methodology that I think can be repeated. If you are interested in knowing more about this, perhaps we can collaborate. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to apologize because I shared your slide a little bit at the end of your presentation. So I think that, but I think that your presentation has been so clear and really contributes to the debate with a different angle, where the advantages and opportunities of kind of vulnerability of being living in an island that now could really be unlocked by digitalization, by virtually acting and transferring knowledge. That is really inspiring, and I have in my mind a lot of questions, maybe regarding artificial intelligence, algorithm, all this that we are now trying to a little bit, in Europe to regulate, and I think that the outmost regions, islands, has a lot of to say on this. Thank you. So, and yeah, I think that we are really, in terms of timing, and we are really, very well, doing very well so far. So now I have the opportunity to introduce Carlos Catoli. He's senior expert on skills and qualifications in the Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission. He has been responsible for Europass, the European Qualifications Framework, the recommendation on validation of non-formal and informal learning, European tools for credit and quality assurance in vocational training, the Euroguidance Network, the Advisory Committee on Vocational Training. So you have built your professional experience on that subject, really. He is currently working on the implementation of the European Skills Agenda and the skills dimension of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. 2020 is really a very important year for all the skills package. We all know this in the framework of the COVID pandemic. We have a lot of noises there. I may ask the speakers, panelists, maybe to mute their micro in order to avoid any sound noises. Thank you. And Carlo asked me to read the questions he wants to submit to the audience before his intervention. And well, with my bad English, I will try to do it. So, questions to the audience will be: when was the first European program for learning mobility launched? And you, the audience, you will have multiple choice, so 4 options. Second question: when did the Council adopted its resolution on vocational training for new technologies? Again, you have 4 options. And third, what was in the EU treaty the legal basis for the first Erasmus program? Again, multiple choice. Well, the disappointing point is that we don't have any prize. We do have just the advantage and the privilege to listen to Carlo. Carlo, now the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Marta. Indeed, there is no prize. It's just for the glory and for the pleasure of learning. So the questions are now available on UCLAP, the same tool that you used during Maria's presentation. So the first question in when was the first European program for, no, that's the third question. Yes, when was the first European program for learning mobility launched? You can see that on UCLAP, and you can submit your reply. You have 4 options: 1987, 1983, 1974, 1964. Please submit your replies. I think that's fine. We can move to the second question. The Council has adopted the resolution on vocational training for new technology. When, in which year did they do this? We also have an option: 2004, 1989, 1983, and 1976. Let's see what's the result. Good. That was 1983, yes, indeed. And finally, the fourth question is about the Erasmus program, which was launched in 1987. And all initiatives of the European Union need to have a legal basis in the Treaty of the European Union. And what was the legal basis for Erasmus? Let's see, what is your view on that? Okay, the result seems to be quite clear. Good. That's fine. So, as you see, the answer was the final one: vocational training for the workforce. But I will comment on these question and replies in my intervention now, and which will link innovation and skills in 2 main ways. On the one hand, there is the need to continuously innovate skills policy. So innovation in the way we develop skills. But then, of course, this is not a means in itself. We want to develop skills to support innovation, to support growth, to support resilience. I will make reference to European initiative, in particular the European Skills Agenda, which is the most recent one. It was released in July 2020. But as you have seen from the question, we also have a foot in our history. We will also talk about initiatives from the past. And let's start indeed with the first question, which most of you did not know how to reply correctly, because the correct question is 1964. The first European program for learning mobility was launched in 1964. It was the program for mobility in vocational training. I think it was called something like the Program of Exchange for Young Workers Training Abroad. It supported stays of 6 to 12 months for young workers to go to do some vocational training in another country of the European Union, which at the time was very small. It was just a 6-country union, still not called union. It was the European Economic Community. Now, 6 to 12 months doesn't seem a very strange duration, because we all know about Erasmus. That's the best known mobility program. And usually mobility within Erasmus for university students is at least 4 months, often more, it's 8 months, or some occasion even longer than that. But mobility in vocational training, which now is part of Erasmus Plus, but which has been funded by other programs in the past, like Petra, Leonardo da Vinci, Urban Lifelong Learning Program, is almost usually a very short duration. 95% of placements in companies abroad do not last more than 4 weeks. Often they last only 2 or 3 weeks. We think, however, that the long-term mobility in vocational training is also important. And 3 years ago, we introduced in Erasmus Plus a specific activity with its own share of budget to be used only for long vocational placements abroad of at least 6 months. Now, for remote regions, this is quite interesting because from regions from which it is quite challenging to travel, it might make more sense to move for a longer term placement. And when we proposed these 3 years ago, it looked very much like an innovation. And there were a number of conservative opponents, let's call them like that. However, as we have seen, it was not that much of an innovation. In fact, this was the way mobility vocational training in Europe had begun more than 50 years ago. So I think this teaches us a lesson, which is when we talk of innovation in skills policy, innovation compares to the most recent paradigm, to the way things are done now, they were done in recent years. But they may actually be very much inspired by past experience. And the national context is also quite important. I can give you another example. There was no question on this, but let's think of apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is the vocational learning modality through which learners learn for some part of their learning in company and part of their learning in schools. Now, widespread apprenticeship schemes today are available only in a few countries of the European Union. In most countries, introducing fully fledged apprenticeship schemes would look very much like an innovation, actually a major reform of the vocational training system. However, this is also not especially new. In fact, learning on the job as young workers in the company of older workers has been the norm for centuries in Europe. That was the way most people learn their job before formal education spread. Of course, the spread of formal education is very positive, is a major positive driver of progress. It has been characteristic of a European society for centuries, and it's a very positive feature of a European society. We see that in some countries, there has been a good balance between the tradition of work-based learning and the new and important tradition of formal primary and secondary education. And now more and more countries are trying to innovate, and now it is an innovation to innovate by re-establishing a better balance between school-based learning and work-based learning, which I must say is a real challenge in a period of lockdown. Of course, learning from the past is important, but we need to adapt to today's standard. That's what makes these kind of reforms and innovation. Apprenticeships today are very different from what learning of a job might have been in the 19th century. Just as mobility, learning mobility today is quite different from it was only 50 years ago. Now the program for the exchange of young workers moved thousands of people, but Erasmus is moving millions of people. And that made quite a difference. Now, as the national context can also have a good, strong impact on what is innovative or not in skills policy, mutual learning across countries is really crucial. The skills agenda is promoting this through its flagship action, which is called the Pact for Skills. The Pact for Skills aims to mobilize and incentivize stakeholders, both private and public, of different kinds, from education and training institutions, companies, civil society organizations, chambers of commerce and other intermediary bodies, industrial association of both employers and workers. So what we're trying to promote is that these stakeholders join partnership organized either around the common sector, automotive or tourism or construction, or around a common feature, for instance, upskilling in remote areas, or a mix of both, for instance, enhancing construction skills in remote regions. The Pact for Skills, which will be launched in a few days from now on the 10th of November in the framework of the European Vocational Skills Week, tries to promote this partnership in order to, through mutual learning and through pooling resources, to be able to adapt skill supply to the skills needs. It should cover, partnership are supposed to cover the whole spectrum from skills need identification to the design and the testing of solution skills, usually through vocational training programs. But there might also be other learning modality to be taken into account. And finally, to develop a fully fledged strategy to keep this going on in a reasonably standing way throughout the next decade. Now, this is about innovation in skills policy, but as I mentioned, this innovation is not a means in itself. It is meant to support the development of skills to make innovation possible in sectors of economic activity, to support growth and to support the resilience of our societies. And of course, there is a strong link to technological and organizational innovation. The European Skills Agenda does emphasize the relevance of digital skills and skills for the green transition. These are the two big transformations of today's society. There is no need to mention again how important digital skills are, in particular for remote regions. as they make services accessible in a leisure way. And in a way, we might see that the lockdown measures which have been taken to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic have somewhat leveled the situation between remote regions and more central regions, because under lockdown condition, it has become necessary for everybody to use digital services more than they were used before. And digital skills have proven to be necessary not just to learn and to work, but also for general social interaction. And the second question helps us put digital skills in the context. The question was, when did the Council adopt a resolution on vocational training for new technologies? Some of you have been able to give a good reply, which was 1983. Now, the dates were not chosen by chance. 1989 was actually the launch of the EuroTechNet program, a small European program which indeed concerned supporting vocational training reforms to better adapt to technological innovation. In 1986 was the date of the resolution on a preparation of young people for work, but there was no specific link to information communication technology. I must say 1986 would have been a very avant-garde resolution if it had concerned ICT skills. But 1983 is still not a result. That means it's almost 40 years ago, so it means that the Council resolution was quite timely. At the time, we had a glimpse that information technology was becoming important, but it had not yet acquired the pervasiveness that it has now. On the other hand, I must say that 2004, that was also one of the dates proposed. The Council was a bit backward in rejecting the proposal for a strongly internet-based Europass. Europass, of course, now is available as an online platform. And the Europass portal was launched as a small portal in 2005. It grew up and became one of the most successful portals of the European Union, used by millions and millions of people. But it might have been even more successful and provided people with a better service if the Council had been able to adopt the full measure that we already proposed in 2004. Now, I'm not criticizing the Council. In 2004, still we were not yet in the age of Google and Facebook. And you might not believe
Carlo,
it. Yes?
You have to try to conclude. So.
I will try to conclude, certainly. See, yet again, innovation is very much based on the comprehensive context and not about a specific set of skills related to a specific set of technologies. Now, trying to conclude, indeed, need to go on. I will move to the last question. That was about the legal basis for the Erasmus program, and which was the correct reply was the fourth one, vocational training of the workforce. Now, that might look like a surprise, because we all know that Erasmus started as a program for exchanges in higher education. And that still is the main feature of Erasmus to these days. But when it was launched in 1987, there was no such thing, based on the treaty, as European cooperation in higher education. There is now an article on this, European cooperation in education, both general, secondary, and higher education, but there wasn't any in 1987. There was, however, already an article on a vocational training a European vocational training policy. which was meant to produce the skills necessary for the European labor market, which was launched in 1957. So this is, in a
Carlo.
way, a plea to not to see skills supply, the development of skills as separate between the different sectors of education and training. Really needs strongest cooperation between higher education, vocational training, adult learning, and general schools. Innovation itself is based on cooperation, and providing the skills to adapt to innovation needs also stronger cooperation. And I think I can conclude here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Carlo. I think that, I mean, I personally learned a lot because I'm following this policy since long time, and despite the fact that the legal basis has been, kind of weak legal basis, because it's a competence of the member states, the field of education. I really witnessed how all the vocational education and training, all the definition of skills has gained political priority, and I think that well, we are really facing a priority. And as I really interpret the skills and the definition and the identification of skills is kind of part of the resilience of a territory. Now, I would like to open really the 20 minutes, more or less, for the discussion. I don't see any question burning in the chat, but I have myself, and I meanwhile maybe some of the participants, some people from either from the audience or from the panelists could raise any other questions. I have a question concerning the gender issue. When you look at the priorities set up by the recovery plan in the European Union towards the Green Deal and the digitalization, the double transition, and when you look the effect of the COVID-19 in the sectors like tourism, culture, and many others, I think that there is kind of risk that those fields that will be launched now, that are highly technologically, could lead to a question of gender, the participation of women in the labor market. What do you think about this question? Who wants to take to answer or to give a contribution to this? Maria, we don't listen to you. You are mute.
Me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So maybe I could provide my input as somebody who has worked in the Croatian islands. What I have seen, and I think Maya from the audience, Maya Jurisic from the Island Movement, she can see, in terms of women participating, women, for example, in the island, especially in the Croatian islands, they're the key actors of development. It is the women that are either organizing women that are organizing different NGOs. It is women that are pushing for this vision of sustainable development. And even when you look at, for example, in the Dubrovnik-Neretva region, which is my region, and in Split region, the majority of women that work in development in either regional development agencies or local development agencies or even entrepreneurial hubs, it's all women. So I think that the notion of women in terms of development, well, I have seen that they are quite prevalent. And also, for example, in the south of France, the incubators and the mentors, well, we can see that more than 50% are actually women. But then again, it's just my empirical observation.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, Alberto?
Again, I don't have a comprehensive answer, but adding to the empirical evidence in the Nordic countries, we see, for instance, that some regions have quite a strong imbalance in the, for instance, in the men-women migration. I referred to Norrbotten earlier. That it is in fact a very wealthy region. With strong mining industries, steel industries, and IT industries. While at the same time, there's a strong out-migration, immigration, and it's not balanced between the genders. We see that there's a big difference between men and women. Lots of women leaving the region to get educated, and this also has to do with the structure of the economy. We see that in the traditional sectors there is a higher participation of men in the manufacturing, in the process industry. There is a big share of men, and also in the, let's say, less traditional, but in the IT industry. IT industry is very strong in the region, and the university is also a very technical university. So there is a lower participation of women. What we see is that, yes, there's many leaving, but also there is a transition. There is that many jobs have been changing towards the service economy, particularly around university and public sector jobs. We shouldn't forget public sector, because sometimes it's a big employer. In this region, is 25%, 30% is just public sector. So there is a big participation of women there. So you can see a divide where they are. Yeah, and well, what does this mean in terms of when we're talking about a structural transition of the economy? We should definitely put a close attention to, well, what kind of jobs are more typically the ones women or men are translated. Again, this is an observation, an empirical observation that I think help us understand the patterns of the gender patterns.
Thank you. This empirical observation, I think this is key really to put in place the right policies, really, because resilience is not something that, I mean, you all elaborate on this. It's something demands complex decisions and multi-stakeholder approach, multi-level governance approach, and it's not just titles. Is really your experience are really very inspiring for this. But many challenges, I think, that are coming very fast in a short and medium term due to the pandemic.
And sorry, if I may add, this is not just an issue of economy. There's something that we should think from an economic perspective, innovation perspective. It is a serious social problem. It really puts serious challenges on the social sustainability in the region. And you find, I mean, many men who go outside of the region to find a couple, a partner, or something like that. So this is also something that needs to be considered.
I completely agree with Alberto. Sorry, Marta. So I agree with Alberto, because when we talk about the gender balance, we have actually I come back to the Croatian islands, we have an oxymoron situation. Because on one hand, as you can see, there is a scarcity of women and men they could find it difficult to get married on one hand. But on the other hand, if you are a woman and if you want to work in the islands, you need to have a community that will take care of the children. Kindergartens and daycare. It is not something that is as present as it is in urban settings. So, for example, if we want to talk about the gender balance in terms of employment in remote regions, the only way for women to be as represented in the workplace as men in these remote regions is to have a strong community, because in these regions we do not have the economic logic that would support the social and the welfare system necessary for women to fully participate in the workplace. So I think it's something that is also very interesting to look into, and it is both interesting from a theoretical stance, either as geographer or as public policy researchers, but also from the empirical stance in how do we organize communities as such. Communities, not organizations, not institutions. Because what we've seen in the COVID, and Jeffrey, you made a very good reference, it is the community. And it's actually, I noted this down, it is the sense of community that we need to redefine our society around this notion. And the gender issue, the multicultural issue, what we can see in France, they all evolve around the sense of community per se.
Thank you. Godfrey, do you want to intervene?
Yeah.
I'm agreeing very much with what Alberto and Maria have said. The gender issue cuts in multiple ways in remote and rural regions. It's not just in terms of the labor market, it cuts also in terms of skills and recognition of experience as equivalent to qualification. For example, it tends to discriminate against women. As women move on in life and achieve status passages, they become married, they have children, they become grandparents. You know, at each and every level, there are different challenges that people face. Not to mention, of course, the loneliness and the solitude that many single women have to face as well, because they tend to outlive us.
Carlo?
Yes, I will say something on gender balance. I'm afraid will not be particularly relevant for remote regions, but there's an interesting paradox we see at European level and in most countries, is that still now, for women, careers are more difficult. Why is this paradoxical? Because we see that very clearly women will all have a much better educational attainment than men. You knew that there was a 2020 target of 40% of young people with a tertiary degree. Now, this objective has been reached thanks to the ladies, because there are something like 45–46% of young women who have achieved a tertiary degree, a university degree, while men have not reached this objective. Men are around 36%. But still now in the labor market, usually the entry in the labor market, in particular in good positions in the labor market, is easier for men than it is for women. Well, one of the reasons may be, of course, that still too few women enroll in faculties which are very much requested on the labor market, such as engineering and science and technology faculties. And the skills agenda, which I mentioned, insists very much on promoting better participation of women in these areas of learning. Also, because with this we are losing a big potential that would come from women who enroll in this kind of disciplines and which now is not available. On the other hand, we also try to promote short courses for adults who already have their degrees, who might find it difficult to find a job, but who could very easily requalify by participating in a relatively short course in information technology or in other more requested areas, areas more requested on the labor market. You'd also need some cooperation from companies, chambers of commerce, and other actors, because very often there is some sort of misperception which doesn't help women. So many companies say that they need engineers. Very often they do not necessarily need engineers. Often they do, of course. Engineers are important figures in many production organizations. But often what is needed is person with a good structured mindset and with a relatively basic set of technological skills, which could be reached through participation, through targeted adult learning schemes. And women could benefit quite greatly from this kind of schemes. And of course, these would not only be beneficial for women, but for society as a whole, because these they would have more chances to find a job and to contribute to society and economy in more general terms.
Thank you. I think that, Carlo, you mentioned a very important point now regarding the gender issue, but regarding as well the importance of anticipation, identification, and ex ante, and the teacher skills, which are rather than to catch up, with technological or demographic or environmental changes after they have happened, but just, the previous phase where we can really a little bit, plan all these strategies, which is so essential. And I hope that the new Recovery and Resilience Fund and the Next Generation EU, that is so linked with the European semester, could really help to do so. And I think that the Commission will have a very important role on analyzing and evaluating the reforms. We have still 2 minutes left. I ask you if do you have any other question or comment. I would be very pleased that to give you the floor to make a final comment. Maybe I start by asking Alberto final comment.
Yes. Maybe again a very empirical addition to say that often we focus on very big meta projects, meta ideas, but often on the ground level we see that problems in matching the supply and the demand can be very, very simple. Simply, employers don't know what skills are there around, or don't have the capacity at the time or the experience of recruiting or headhunting. And often the job seekers don't know what companies are there. So sometimes there's just a little bit of work to do on the ground to bring job seekers and employers closer together. And what we see in some of the cases that have worked, this can be many different actors can do this. We see often this adult education is not, I don't know if it's exactly as vocational, but adult education where companies participate on the training of these job seekers. Often people who are marginalized or don't want to do some kind of academic education, but still can have some kind of training where the company participates. Sometimes it is a consultant, sometimes it is the employer office, and sometimes it's a collaboration between these different ones. And sometimes it's directly the initiative from companies to participate in training the local population. So a focus here on skills, supply and demand is focus also on these very practical issues on the ground. Thank you.
Godfrey, from the island perspective. You are mute.
You can't hear me?
Yes.
All right, so you can hear me. I was saying that listening to people on the ground is very important. One of the methodologies that I really would like to see more being used is actually talking to people who have made the decision to why their stay in a remote rural region when they had choices to leave, or to go to a remote rural region as a migrant, an immigrant, or thirdly, to return to a remote or island region. You know, there are these three variables: staying, returning, or migrating. Three different choices that people can make today in order to decide to settle in a different place. And when you listen to their stories, they will come up with some interesting reasons why they do that. You know, it could be about, I don't know, the love of nature. It could be about having their kids grow in a safe community. It could be about reconnecting with their aging relatives or parents. It doesn't necessarily have to deal with work. As I said, work today comes in so many different ways. One can even avoid work. There are a lot of people who are self-employed in these communities. You know, they offer professional services, consultancy services. They do a little bit of farming, perhaps a little bit of fishing, odd jobs here and there. You know, the employment market is not necessarily as structured as some of us imagine, those of us living in big cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is very illustrating the variety, yes, of the situation on the spot. Maria, do you have a final remark?
Well, I would just like to underline the importance of participation in regions and in insular regions. People tend to first seek outside of their territory and not within their territory, because their preliminary hypothesis is that it is a remote rural region, there is no skills, there is no knowledge. So I'm going to look outwards, I'm going to look into the cities, I'm going to look for other people. I'm not going to ask my neighbor because he does not know. So I think that the first step to do, and the first thing that we need to do when we talk about skill supply, you look what is there within our territory. What is the skill and the knowledge that exists within our territory without the judgment? Because we know that in remote and rural regions, people tend to have more judgment towards each other than in urban areas because they know each other better. So the key is to overcome this and really to work together, because the sense of community is what makes the difference between a developed and non-developed community, between a community where people come and stay and between the community they leave.
Okay, I think that we are very close to our end, or we have already ended up. So thank you very much. I think that really working with you, listening to you has been very inspiring. And well, now I'm looking forward to Doris that we'll have to really written down the outcomes of our session. And again, has been a great pleasure to moderate you, very easy task. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All the public of the audience.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Marta.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.